one. So today we're going to be working on replacing this oil separator plate. And this one is a good example of why the original plastic one should be swapped out for the new updated version, which is this metal one here. And this engine here, it's out of a 98 Legacy. And most of these older 90s engines had a composite kind of plastic separator plate. And this one here has actually melted and gotten burned up. And we're pretty sure the cause of this melting is the fact that the clutch here completely burned up. And I think that heated up the flywheel to the point that it also melted this plate. And has now, the engine should still be fine, but this can allow debris to get down into the oil, because this takes all the crankcase venting gases that come up from inside the crankcase in the oil pan, and they actually run up along this plate up through this hose here into the PCV valve, and the engine sucks that in and reburns it. So this actually does lead down into the oil pan. So this is definitely something you don't want to have happen, because then you can have debris getting into your oil.
And this is a kit I got on Amazon. It was like $30. It comes with a new metal version of this, and I think you just use like RTV or a liquid sealant on the back.
We'll actually be using some of this stuff here, which is my personal favorite gasket maker. Thermatech's Right Stuff. Not a sponsorship or anything, but the right stuff is the right stuff. I find this works better than like that Subaru gray sealer that you can get. Whatever, I forget what that Subaru version is called. But this stuff really works great. I mean, it's kind of hard if you ever have to take anything apart again. It really sticks it together, but this seals really well and handles heat, oil, everything. Really works great.
And the kit also comes with new hardware, and the bolts are hex bolts. I don't know if you can see that.
So that replaces the old Phillips head screws with these hex bolts here. And yeah, you get a nice metal plate instead of this plastic. So we'll go ahead and get that taken off, and hopefully everything is looking good back there.
Okay.
All right, look at that. It's melted from the outside in. Okay, so I've gotten that surface all nice and cleaned up now. So we can go ahead and put some sealant on the new cover and get that installed. And ready to install the new plate.
And worth noting, so we kind of cleaned up this area with brake cleaner, got kind of old built up oil residue and stuff out. Also cleaned up this edge that's going to be sealing.
And then I've got the new hardware. Let's take a 4mm Allen socket, and this bolt here, this black one, goes in this location here. There's a little arrow indicating where that one goes. And that one's different from the rest of these bolts that are just silver. That black one comes with Loctite on it. Assuming that this location here maybe gets a little bit hotter, or yeah, I'm guessing probably it's related to heat, and that one has a tendency to back out more often, which is why it comes with Loctite on it.
And it's interesting because when we pulled the flywheel, that bolt was actually loose. So
yeah, that one had loosened up more than all the others.
Yeah, it was like
on the old.
It was kind of backed out a little bit. So
Now the old separator plate was also half melted, so that might have had something to do with it. But yeah, that was the one right here, which it also looks like on this melted cover, that was where the most heat was as well. So
True.
that could be something, have something to do with it. All right, and that's about it. Got the new separator plate installed. This is if you have oil leaking from the back of your engine. Most of the time you'd think that that's going to be your rear main seal leaking, which would be the likely case on most engines. But on these Subarus, especially if you have the plastic one on like an older 90s car, it's most likely going to be this separator plate here is where your leak is coming from and not your rear main. Not that it makes that much difference, as you still have to pull either the transmission or the engine and remove the flywheel to get back here to fix any of this. But don't jump right to thinking, oh, I just have to put a rear main seal in, because if you do that and you don't replace this, you're still going to end up with a leak. The other one we're going to do here next is put a new O-ring behind this. This is a wrist pin access hole, and that just takes one of these O-rings here. This is what you remove if you were going to remove the pistons from the block. You take this off to get to one of the piston wrist pins back here. But this is another common leak location. That O-ring gets dried up and hard over time, and you start to get some oil leaking out of there too. So yeah, so these two screws here were very stuck, which happens sometimes. So we actually use one of these impact drivers. You put one of these in, turn the direction you want to go, and smack the backside of a hammer, and that can that worked well to free up those screws. It does kind of destroy the screws, but that's fine because now we have all the screws that came off the old plate to use as spares.
The old gasket was
so
crunchy.
That's why that ends up leaking, is this guy, yeah, they get really hard and dried out over time, and now it's not even like rubber anymore, it's like hard plastic, and that's why that will leak. Alright, so we got the new O-ring on this wrist pin access cover. Throw that back on.
And then just kind of give them a good...
Yeah, just get it fairly tight, but not totally tight. And make sure when you're, for these screws here, make sure you're using like one of these
P3?
P3, yeah, larger tipped screwdrivers.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is, if you're also replacing this with the updated one with these hex bolts, the nice thing is that as long as you get at least a few of these out, if you destroy these screws, that will give you some extras that you can then use on this plate if you ruin these ones. Okay, so we are going to also replace the rear main seal. Normally, I would not recommend doing that if you've been able to determine that your leaks are just coming from the oil separator and this wrist pin access cover. These are the two most common leaks you'll get from the rear of the Subaru engines. Very rare actually that the rear main goes out on these, but we are going to go ahead and replace this because of how melted that old oil separator was. We're kind of worried that the heat from that flywheel may have ended up cooking this seal. So we did get a new rear main seal, and we're going to go ahead and pull this out. This can be kind of hard to get out of here because it's hard to see like, well, where would I grab it to pry on it. So the trick to doing that is we're going to take a drill with, this is a 1/8 inch bit on it. We're going to drill a pry bar that I've cut a little notch in, a screw, and then you'll just drive that in a normal screwdriver. So To start, let's go ahead and drill a small hole. We want to get like in the middle of the seal in between these two little lines here.
And
just go slowly, and yeah, it's going to try to wander.
okay.
There is, it looks like it's rubber, but there's metal behind this rubber that you're drilling into. And just go slow so that you don't end up going through and then like hitting any of the aluminum behind the seal. Just gonna run a small screw into that hole, probably pretty good about there. And then actually hook it across the crankshaft. Yeah.
Ah, got a little bit of
Started?
yeah.
Okay. And I'm gonna grab a different screw, I think. I'll get one with a little bit coarser threads.
Okay.
And maybe that will grab a little better.
Yeah, I can feel it grabbing in. It's getting a little close to the inner edge, but I don't think it's like
Yeah,
scraping.
that should still be all right.
I think that seems pretty good. It's like,
Yeah.
it's in there pretty good.
Yeah, the seal is probably baked in pretty well.
I have a pretty good slit in there.
Maybe now that that's opened up, we could get like a pair of like little pliers or something
Yeah.
to like grab hold of it and kind of.
Oh, nice.
There we go. All right, there we go.
Oh.
So it didn't go quite as smoothly as I would have liked, but it worked. Very small nick right there. That doesn't matter out there. It's more this one that I'm worried about.
Right.
We could take, because there's also just like a little bit of a groove from it riding in the same spot for years. So what we could do is take a little bit of very fine grit sandpaper and just sand it slightly, just to clean it up. Okay, so just to clean up the edges of this the crankshaft here, we're just going to take a little bit of fine grit, this is 500 grit sandpaper, and just very lightly sand around the sealing surfaces here on the crankshaft. There is a slight little bit of a groove on the crankshaft from where it had been riding in the same location on that old seal for years.
Oh, right, because the outside edge is static and the inside edge is spinning.
Yes.
Whenever the engine's running, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of just carbon buildup and residue on here, so this will just help to knock a little bit of that down and smooth it out so that the new seal will have a cleaner surface to seal against. You just want to try to go evenly around the crankshaft and try to avoid like cutting or sanding into the aluminum too much. Okay, so I got the old seal out, everything all nice and cleaned up here. And I like to just install these dry. Don't worry about oiling up the surfaces here, and definitely don't oil the outside of the seal. And you want to make sure you keep it nice and square as it's going in. And I just kind of get it started by hand, and then just get it like that. And then to install it the rest of the way, this is my seal driver tool, which is a piece of 3-inch diameter. It's an ABS coupler, and this works out to be about the perfect size to drive the seal in. And we'll drive it in using a dead blow hammer, or just a rubber mallet would also work, but you want to just use something that's I would not recommend using a metal hammer. It's going to apply too much of a sharp impact, and you want to just drive that seal in until it's flush with the edge of the block, and just carefully go around it and make sure you keep it as even as possible as you're tapping it in.
There.
Yeah, just a little bit
And
more.
I want to make sure to not overdo it.
Yeah, you don't want to go too far because there is a oil drain. There's a small drain hole on the basically on the bottom side of the block, right about. It ends up like right about here, and it's an oil return so that the oil coming off the crank can drain back into the block.
Through this little channel?
No, I think that's just a
kinda
part of the casting, but there is a small port back there, and if you drive the seal in too far, it will block that port, and then it will actually build pressure behind the seal and it can push it back out. So yeah, you want to go between flush to like maybe just slightly
pushing. Oh, slightly more in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But pretty close to flush. You can go in like, maybe a millimeter past flush, but you don't want to go much past that.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the install. It should look about like this. A little hard to see here, but it's pretty much flush with the edge of the block here, and that's where you want it. You don't want to go too far. And yeah, that's about it for the spots on the rear of the engine that can end up leaking. The main one though is this oil separator. Definitely, if you have an older engine that has the plastic cover, definitely recommend upgrading to this metal one. And then get some of those O-rings for this wrist pin access cover, because that's another common leak point. And then if you need to replace the rear main, you can do that. I don't recommend replacing this just because you're in here, unless you have a reason to think it might be either too dried out or burned up like the one was in this case. But if you haven't had a clutch get totally burned up and your rear cover wasn't melted like ours was, I would probably just leave this alone, unless you can evidently see oil leaking out of it, but it's pretty rare that those leak on these cars. So yeah, and that's about it for fixing the leaks on the rear of a Subaru engine.